Welcome to another deep dive.
Oh, this is going to be a good one.
Today, we're strapping in for a deep dive into the world of the Airbus A320. We have got a stack of fascinating source material that you've provided, a bunch of pilot notes and training manuals, and even emergency checklists.
It is fascinating stuff.
It's like we have a backstage pass to what happens on those flights. So get ready to uncover the details, the behind-the-scenes stuff, and maybe even some surprises.
I think there'll be a few surprises along the way, yeah.
That will give you a whole new appreciation for what happens on your next A320 flight.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's start with what happens before the plane even pushes back from the gate.
Right.
The pre-flight rituals.
Yeah,
It's more than just checking the fuel gauge, right?
absolutely. It's a very structured, meticulous process. Pilots actually use a mnemonic to make sure that they don't miss anything.
A mnemonic. I love those.
Don't you?
Yeah. Break it down for us.
BBLPP.
BBLPP.
Okay. It stands for Logbook, Instruments, Brief, Before Start Checklist, Load Sheet, Passenger Address, and Performance Calculations. And that's sort of their mental checklist to make sure that everything is in order before they even think about touching those controls.
So every flight starts with a deep dive into the logbook.
Indeed.
What are they looking for there?
Primarily making sure that that aircraft is airworthy. There's another mnemonic for that: Air Operator Certificate, Noise Certificate, Airworthiness Certificate, Registration, Radio License, and Maintenance Records. So that checks that all the paperwork is in place and up to date and that the aircraft has had any maintenance that's been required.
So many checks.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much goes into ensuring safety before the engines even start. Are there any specific details they're looking for in that logbook?
Yeah, they'll check for things like entries related to routine checks. So, those that are done every 48 hours or weekly.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, they have to sign the logbook even before fueling is complete.
Wow, that shows how seriously they take it. Every detail matters.
Absolutely.
Speaking of details, you mentioned passenger address as part of that pre-flight mnemonic. Is there a specific trigger for that welcome PA that we hear as passengers?
Yes, actually. You might think that the pilot just decides when he's going to make the welcome aboard, but it's actually coordinated with the cabin crew. The pilot won't make that announcement until the purser signals all on board.
So there's a whole coordinated dance happening before we even hear from the cockpit.
Yeah.
I had no idea. What about, we're seeing in these materials, there's other passenger addresses.
Right.
It seems like there's a PA for just about every scenario.
Well, that's true. Whether it's a welcome message or a delay announcement, a notice about some technical issue, or even something as simple as a discontinued taxi, they have specific PAs designed for all of these eventualities. But each PA, each passenger address will follow a consistent structure. So greeting, introduction of crew, flight information, and then always a touch of reassurance for the passengers.
It's reassuring to know there's a plan for every situation.
Yeah.
Speaking of plans, what about some of the less obvious aspects of the A320? What kind of secrets are we unearthing in these manuals?
Okay, well, how about this for something that'll make you feel extra safe on your next flight?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the fire suppression system in the cargo compartments.
Okay.
Did you know it's a two-bottle system?
I am seeing something in here about that.
Right.
It looks very complex.
It is. The first bottle discharges quickly for immediate suppression of any fire.
Right.
But here's the thing. The second bottle provides prolonged protection for an incredible 260 minutes.
Mm.
It's over 4 hours.
Wow. Peace of mind right there.
Yeah.
So that gives them plenty of time to get down if there is a fire.
Yeah.
What about, whenever I see those tight turns that pilots have to make sometimes on the runway, it always seems so precarious.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What's going on there?
It is a maneuver that requires a lot of precision. They use something called asymmetric thrust, where one engine is generating significantly more power than the other, and they have to keep the ground speed below 10 knots.
10 knots. That's barely crawling.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's all about control.
Yeah.
You got to remember, this is a massive aircraft operating in a very confined space.
Yeah.
So precision is key.
Absolutely. Speaking of being prepared for anything, I'm seeing a whole checklist here of emergency equipment that the pilots need to check. It's more than just, life vests.
Oh, yeah. Much more. We're talking escape ropes, fire axe, even the charge level of their torches.
It's like they're prepared for absolutely any scenario.
You bet.
Which brings us to something we hope never happens, but it's crucial to be ready for, and that is engine failure.
Right.
What happens when a pilot has to deal with an engine out situation, especially right after takeoff?
Okay. Well, it's a high-pressure situation, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But pilots are very, very meticulously trained for this eventuality. They follow a checklist, AOAPKOC.
Okay, we got to decode that alphabet soup.
We do, we do. Okay, so it stands for acknowledge, airspeed, altitude, power, checklist, obstacle clearance, communicate, and configure. And
Yeah.
so this checklist outlines the immediate actions they need to take to stabilize the aircraft
Yeah.
and address the situation.
So it provides structure in a very high stress moment.
Absolutely.
Do they always divert to the nearest airport if this happens?
Well, not necessarily.
Yeah.
They need to weigh a lot of factors. How severe is the engine problem? How much fuel do they have? What are the weather conditions like at the nearest suitable airport? Even what sort of terrain are they flying over?
Right.
Sometimes continuing to their original destination might actually be the safest option.
Wow, so many factors at play.
Yeah.
Fuel management must be crucial in these situations, especially on a single engine.
Absolutely. They factor in a 30% fuel increase for potential diversions when they're flying on one engine.
Okay, now this is where it gets really intriguing for me. What happens in that extremely rare case of a double-engine flameout? I mean, talk about a nightmare scenario.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate nightmare scenario. But of course, pilots are trained for this as well. And they need to know the optimum speed for attempting to restart the engines, 280 knots.
Why that specific speed?
Well, think of it this way. It's a delicate balance.
Okay.
At 280 knots, there's enough airflow to get those engines spinning fast enough that they might relight.
Right.
But it's not so fast that you risk causing further damage.
So speed is critical, but what else do they need to know in this scenario?
Well, they need to understand the plane's glide ratios. Essentially, that's how far it can glide forward for every 1,000 feet of altitude it loses. That helps them to figure out how far they can travel without engine power, and therefore choose the best possible landing site.
Right.
And they'll also use something called the Flight Control Unit, or FCU, to manage the speed and altitude during that powerless glide.
So it's all about maximizing their options and buying time, hopefully, to find a safe landing spot. What if it's still uncertain they can make a safe landing?
Well, in that case, they'll perform what's called a precautionary landing. That means that, they're preparing the cabin for a possible evacuation, even though they're still hoping to land safely without one. The captain will brief the chief purser, and then the chief purser will prep the cabin crew and the passengers for that eventuality.
So even in a worst-case scenario, clear communication is key.
Always. Keeping everyone informed and as calm as possible. That helps to manage expectations, minimize panic.
Now, let's say they do manage a safe landing after an engine issue. What happens next?
Well, after landing, it's back to that logbook we were talking about earlier, the pilots have to document everything that happened, the procedures they followed, any issues they encountered, and that information helps to inform maintenance engineers about any repairs that might be needed, and it keeps that detailed record of the aircraft's history.
So the logbooks aren't just about pre-flight checks. It's a comprehensive record of the plane's health and every flight it takes.
Exactly, yeah. They provide a trail of valuable information for engineers, for investigators, for anyone whose job it is to make sure these aircrafts keep flying safely.
We've covered so much ground already,
Yep.
from pre-flight rituals to engine failures. It's incredible how much happens before the plane even leaves the ground. What other fascinating insights await us in these A320 materials?
Well, sometimes things don't go exactly according to plan, Let's take a look at how pilots handle those situations that go beyond normal operations. Things like dealing with delays and fatigue.
I think every passenger has experienced a delay. It's easy to get frustrated. I'm guessing it's a whole different ballgame from the pilot's perspective.
You're absolutely right. Delays can stem from a myriad of factors.
Yeah.
From whether, think de-icing or runway closures,
Right.
to air traffic control, halts, even airport curfews. And these delays, of course, they can take a toll on pilot fatigue, especially when compounded with long duty days, late night flights, those constantly shifting crew start times.
That's a lot to juggle.
It is.
And it makes you really appreciate that the pilots aren't just flying the plane, they're constantly adapting to these changing conditions and making these critical decisions
Absolutely.
to keep everyone safe.
That's right. And in these situations, clear communication is paramount.
Yeah.
Keeping the crew informed, keeping passengers updated, that helps to manage expectations and minimize stress, especially when things are, out of our control.
Absolutely. Speaking of control, I'm seeing some things here about what pilots do when they need to extend their flight duty period or reduce their required rest time.
Right. That's where the commander's discretion report comes into play.
Yeah.
CDR, as they call it.
The CD. Okay.
Yeah. So this is a formal way for pilots to document any deviations from standard regulations, deviations that become necessary because of unforeseen circumstances.
Right.
For instance, let's say a flight is significantly delayed and the crew needs to extend their duty time in order to complete that flight safely. They would file a CDR.
So it's a way of logging these judgment calls and ensuring transparency, especially in situations where safety might be impacted.
Precisely. And these reports also provide valuable data that the airline can use to monitor fatigue levels amongst their pilots and make sure that safety standards aren't being compromised.
Now let's dive into some of those specific scenarios where pilots need to go beyond normal procedures. I'm seeing some stuff here about engine outperformance calculations. What are they calculating there?
Well, these calculations are all about ensuring that the plane can safely take off and clear any obstacles, even if an engine fails during takeoff. They take into account things like the aircraft's weight, the flap settings they're using, even the temperature and altitude of the airport.
So it's not just knowing how to fly the plane, it's about understanding the physics and performance limitations of the aircraft.
It is.
In every single situation.
That's right. And those calculations are really crucial for making the right call during, what are very critical phases of flight.
Now, I'm seeing some acronyms here.
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of those.
That are related to some of this technology that's helping the pilots navigate the skies. One that caught my eye was RVSM. What does that stand for and why is it important?
RVSM stands for Reduced Vertical Separation Minimum.
Okay.
Essentially, it's a system that lets aircraft fly closer together vertically in certain airspace.
Interesting.
Now, that might sound counterintuitive.
That does.
But it actually increases airspace capacity, which allows for more efficient routing.
So more planes can fly safely in the same airspace.
That's right. But it requires a lot of precision, a lot of adherence to standards.
Of course.
Both the aircraft and the pilots have to meet very specific equipment and training requirements for RVSM. And there are procedures in place for handling things like equipment failures or weather deviations that could impact safety within that airspace.
Like, for example, what happens if a pilot experiences a transponder failure while flying in RVSM airspace?
Okay. Well, in that case, they would immediately contact air traffic control and request clearance to keep flying at their assigned altitude. They might also need specific headings, or vectors as they're called, to steer clear of other aircraft.
Okay.
And if there's severe turbulence, air traffic control might actually suspend RVSM procedures altogether to increase that vertical separation between planes and maintain safety.
It's mind-boggling how much coordination and precision goes into managing air traffic.
Yeah, it is.
But what about those situations where communication breaks down entirely? What happens when a pilot loses contact with air traffic control?
Well, this is, again, another scenario they train for extensively. If a pilot experiences a complete communication failure, they have a very strict set of procedures they have to follow.
Okay.
They'll maintain their last assigned altitude and speed for a specific amount of time. They're hoping that communication can be reestablished.
Right.
They'll also report their position over certain compulsory reporting points.
Right.
So letting air traffic control know where they are, even though they can't talk to them directly. And they might use other means of communication, like light signals, to signal their intentions to other aircraft or to ground personnel.
It's like they're flying blind in terms of communication, but still adhering to a plan so their actions are predictable.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's all about staying calm, following those procedures, and, above all else, prioritizing safety.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our A320 deep dive.
I think so, yeah.
From pre-flight checks to emergency procedures.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to explore.
There is. I can't wait.
I'm eager to dive into these additional materials that you've shared. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with more of our A320 deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
Calling all aspiring pilots and aviation enthusiasts. Want to navigate the skies with confidence and expertise? Look no further than Captain James's Professional Airline Pilot Series and his Sky Call YouTube podcast. Captain James's decades of experience flying a variety of aircraft, including the Airbus A320 and 330 and Boeing 737 and 777 across continents, shines through in his work, offering practical advice and insightful anecdotes. His books, available on Amazon Kindle, provide comprehensive guidance for every stage of a pilot's journey. Preparing for your airline command? Airline Command Preparation Course covers everything from technical knowledge and standard operating procedures to managing flight crews and handling emergencies. Nervous about the interview process? Airline Pilot Interview Manual demystifies the experience, providing practical tips and real-world scenarios to help you land your dream job. Craving in-depth technical knowledge? James's aircraft-specific books, featuring 600 technical questions on each aircraft, will make you an expert on your chosen plane. James's Skycool YouTube podcast expands on these themes, offering a dynamic learning experience. You'll master the art of command, ace the interview, and conquer emergencies with his expert insights. He also provides behind-the-scenes perspectives on airline operations and answers your burning questions about the world of aviation. Whether you're just starting your aviation journey or looking to advance your career, Captain James's resources are your ultimate guide to soaring to new heights. The link to his Kindle books are provided in the description below.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of the Airbus A320. We've already uncovered a ton of fascinating details about those pre-flight procedures and how pilots handle all those what-if scenarios.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me just how much goes on behind the scenes to keep those flights running smoothly and safely.
Absolutely. And I'm noticing a theme in these materials. Clear communication is absolutely key.
Yeah.
It seems like, pilots rely so heavily on very specific terminology and abbreviations to communicate effectively.
Right.
Especially during those critical phases of flight.
It's true. There's a whole glossary of terms and acronyms that might sound like a foreign language to those of us who aren't pilots.
Let's decode some of that aviation jargon then. I'm seeing terms like LWMO, MPA, RVR, DH, MGA.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
Okay, well, how about we start with LWMO, which stands for Low Visibility Minimums Operations. So imagine you're on a flight and the weather takes a turn for the worse, maybe fog rolls in or there's heavy rain.
Right.
LWMO refers to the specific procedures and equipment that allow pilots to land safely even when visibility is reduced.
So it's all about maintaining safety when things get a little hazy out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about instrument approaches.
Okay.
You've probably heard of the Instrument Landing System, or ILS.
Yeah, that guides the planes down to the runway, right?
That's it, yeah. Provides both horizontal and vertical guidance.
Like an invisible highway in the sky.
Yeah, a very accurate analogy. But there's another type of instrument approach called a non-precision approach, or NPA. And this one doesn't provide vertical guidance.
So how do the pilots know what their descent path should be if they don't have that vertical guidance from the instruments?
Well, they rely on their training, their instruments, and some good old-fashioned calculations to figure out the correct descent path.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where RVR becomes crucial.
Okay, RVR, is that runway visual range?
Yes, it is. It's a measurement of how far down the runway a pilot can see.
Okay.
So think of it this way. The lower the visibility, the lower the RVR.
Right.
And the more challenging that landing becomes.
So the pilots need to know that RVR to decide if it's even safe to attempt a landing in those conditions.
Absolutely.
Mm.
They'll compare the reported RVR to the minimum RVR required for the specific approach they're using.
Okay.
And if the visibility is below that minimum, they'll have to divert to another airport. Now, during those low visibility approaches, there's another really critical factor that comes into play.
Okay.
Decision height, or DH.
Decision height. Break that one down for us.
Okay, so picture this. You're on a plane. You're descending through thick fog.
Right.
The pilot's following the instruments. But at some point, they have to make a decision.
Okay.
Do they continue the approach?
Right. Or do they go around if they don't have the runway in sight?
Got it.
That point is the decision height.
So it's that gonna-go point
Yeah.
during those low visibility landings.
Exactly. And MDA, or minimum descent altitude, is a similar concept used for non-precision approaches, where they don't have that vertical guidance. It's the lowest altitude they can descend to unless they have the required visual references to continue the landing.
Got it. Okay, I'm starting to see how all these terms and these concepts sort of work together to ensure safe landings,
Yeah.
even when visibility is poor.
That's it. Yeah.
But what happens if the weather at their destination is just so bad that landing there isn't an option.
Right.
How do they decide? How do they choose which alternate airport to divert to?
Well, this is where those Jeppesen charts we were talking about earlier,
Right.
they come into play. There's a table in there, usually called Table A,
Okay.
and it helps pilots determine if an alternate airport meets the minimum weather requirements for a safe landing.
So essentially, they have to add certain values to the published decision height or minimum descent altitude, along with the visibility requirements for the approach they'll be using.
So it's like adding a safety buffer
Yeah, yeah.
to account for the added challenge of, landing in an unfamiliar airport, potentially in tricky conditions.
Exactly. And they'll also consider things like the availability of runway lighting and whether there are any obstacles on the approach path that could make the landing more difficult.
It's incredible how much planning and precision goes into every single flight.
I know. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, speaking of precision, there's a system that I find incredibly fascinating.
Okay.
Autoland.
Ah, yes.
Can you tell us more about how that works?
Autoland is essentially an autopilot system that can land the plane automatically
Okay.
under certain conditions.
Mhm.
It's particularly useful in low visibility situations where it can reduce pilot workload and improve landing accuracy.
So how does it actually work? I mean, does the pilot just, flip a switch and the plane lands itself?
It's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
The pilot engages the autoland system,
Right.
and then the aircraft will follow a pre-programmed approach path
Yeah.
using its instruments and its computers to guide it down to the runway. But the pilots are still actively monitoring the systems and making sure everything is working as expected.
So they're not just sitting back watching.
No, no, no. What kind of things are they looking for during an auto land?
Well, they're monitoring a whole range of parameters. Airspeed, altitude, descent rate, the position of the aircraft relative to the runway.
Right.
And there are specific callouts they make at certain points during that auto-land process. For example, they'll announce land green, which indicates the auto-land system is armed and ready to go, and minimum when the aircraft reaches the decision height.
So it's very much a collaborative effort
It is.
between the pilots and the automation.
Yes, absolutely. And there are very specific criteria that have to be met for an auto-land to be successful.
And if any of those criteria aren't met, for instance, unstable approach parameters or lack of the required visual references, then the pilot will initiate a missed approach and take manual control.
So it sounds like a very valuable tool for enhancing safety in those challenging landing conditions.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a testament to the advanced technology that we have on board these aircraft.
Now let's turn our attention to something that I think every passenger has a love-hate relationship with.
Okay.
Flight delays.
All right, right.
We talked about how they can impact pilot fatigue, but I'm seeing a lot more detail here
Yeah.
about the various causes of delays
Yes.
and how pilots manage them.
It's a topic that can get passengers riled up, and understandably so.
For sure.
Delays can disrupt travel plans, lead to missed connections,
Of course.
but it's important to remember that they're often unavoidable, and they are put in place to prioritize safety.
What are some of those most common culprits behind those frustrating delays?
Well, it could be anything from weather issues, thunderstorms, fog, snow, which can ground flights, or necessitate de-icing procedures.
Mm-hmm.
Or air traffic control holds because of congestion in the airspace.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's mechanical problems with the aircraft that require maintenance. Sometimes even delays in getting, catering or baggage loaded onto the plane.
So it's this complex web of factors,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's just a matter of waiting for all the pieces to fall into place.
That's right. And while passengers might assume that it's always the pilot's fault,
Right.
the reality is that pilots often have very little control over those factors that cause delays. Their primary responsibility is to ensure the flight operates safely. And that means adhering to all regulations and procedures, even if it means a delay.
So what are the pilots actually doing while they're waiting for a delay to be resolved? Are they just, sitting around twiddling their thumbs?
Not at all. Not at all. They're actively managing that situation, using the time productively. They'll be in constant communication with air traffic control, dispatchers, ground personnel, getting updates, making sure that they're ready to go as soon as possible.
So they're staying informed, anticipating any changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they'll also use that time to review procedures, double-check weather forecasts, and communicate any relevant information to the cabin crew.
I imagine keeping the passengers informed is a big part of managing a delay.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Passengers, they appreciate knowing what's going on, even if it's not the news they want to hear. So the pilots will make announcements to explain the reason for the delay, provide estimated departure times, and address any concerns passengers might have.
Right.
Of course, this can be tricky when, the information they're getting is constantly changing,
Yeah.
or if there's just a lot of uncertainty about how long that delay is going to last.
It's a balancing act between keeping people in the loop and managing expectations realistically.
It really is. It really is. And sometimes all you can do is ask for patience and understanding as they work to resolve the situation and get everyone to their destination safely.
Now, let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and delve into a topic that's always on my mind when I fly.
Okay.
Emergency procedures.
Right.
We've talked about those specific scenarios, like engine failure.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing some stuff here
Right.
about a more general framework for handling emergencies.
You're talking about the aviate, navigate, communicate model. That's really the foundation of emergency procedures in aviation.
Aviate, navigate, communicate.
Yeah. It sounds simple,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing there's more to it than meets the eye.
There usually is.
There is. It's a simple concept, but it encompasses a whole lot of training and experience.
Okay.
Essentially, it means that in any emergency situation, the pilot's first and foremost priority is to maintain control of that aircraft. That's the aviate part.
So first things first,
Yeah.
keep the plane flying.
Exactly. Once the aircraft is stable, under control,
Right.
they move on to navigate, which involves figuring out the best course of action to resolve that situation.
Okay.
Do they need to divert to another airport? Can they continue to their destination? What procedures need to be followed to mitigate the risk?
And then communication comes last. That seems counterintuitive.
Well, not really. Once they've got the situation under control, they have a plan in mind.
Right.
Then they can communicate effectively with air traffic control and other relevant parties to inform them of the situation, request assistance if needed.
Yeah.
It's about communicating clearly and concisely, providing accurate information, and following the established protocols.
So it's very much a hierarchical approach
Yes.
that ensures that the pilots are focusing on the most critical tasks
Yeah.
in the right order.
Exactly. It's a model that's drilled into them from day one of their training, and it becomes second nature when those, high-pressure situations arise.
Now, we've already talked about the procedures for handling a double-engine flameout. Right. But what about another potential emergency? A loss of cabin pressure.
Okay. Well, that's another situation that requires, quick thinking and decisive action. If there's a loss of cabin pressure, the pilot's immediate priority is to get the aircraft down to a lower altitude
Okay.
where the air is breathable.
Right.
So they'll initiate an emergency descent,
Right.
following a specific profile to ensure that descent is controlled and safe. And while they're descending, they'll also administer oxygen to the passengers and crew using the emergency oxygen masks that are available in the cabin.
So it's like a race against time to get to an altitude where passengers can breathe normally.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. And they'll also be communicating with air traffic control, informing them of the situation and their intentions.
It sounds like all of these emergency procedures are really about buying time,
Yeah.
mitigating those immediate risks, and just getting everyone to safety as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Absolutely. That's it in a nutshell. And pilots undergo extensive training in simulators to practice these scenarios.
Yeah.
So that they can react instinctively and confidently if a real emergency occurs.
We've explored such a vast range of information in this deep dive, from those pre-flight routines to the emergency procedures to the technical intricacies of navigation and communication.
It is a lot to take in, yeah.
It's truly fascinating to peek behind that curtain and understand the complexity of what goes into keeping those flights safe and efficient.
It really is a testament to the incredible skill, training, and dedication of those pilots and crew who make it all happen.
But there's still so much more to uncover.
There is.
And I'm eager to delve into these additional materials that you've shared.
Well, then let's continue our deep dive
All right.
and explore even more fascinating aspects of A320 operations.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of A320 operations.
I'm ready for more.
We've been on quite a journey, haven't we?
We have.
From those pre-flight checks to emergency procedures to those pilot calculations. It's amazing how much goes on behind the scenes to keep those flights safe and efficient.
It really is a testament to the dedication and the skill.
Absolutely.
And the unwavering commitment to safety of everyone involved in aviation.
And as we've seen, clear communication is paramount.
It is, yes.
especially when it comes to those uh-oh
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah, absolutely. In an emergency, clear, concise communication, it becomes even more crucial.
Right.
It can literally be the difference between a safe outcome and a disaster.
We've talked about the
Right.
specific phraseology and those call-outs that pilots use during normal operations.
Mhm.
I'm curious, are there any special codes or signals they use in emergencies?
Absolutely. One of the most critical communication tools in an emergency is the
A
transponder.
transponder,
Yeah.
that's the device that transmits a coded signal, right?
Uh,
I know air traffic control uses that to track aircraft,
Right.
but how does that help in an emergency?
Well, imagine you're a pilot. You're experiencing a serious problem,
Okay,
maybe an engine failure or a loss of communications. You need to alert air traffic control immediately.
right,
But what if you can't make a voice call?
right.
That's where transponder codes come in.
So it's like a silent alarm?
Exactly, exactly. Pilots can set specific transponder codes that signal different types of emergencies. For instance, squawking 7700, that's the universal code for a general emergency. So that lets the controllers know instantly
Right.
that something is wrong,
Okay.
and they need to prioritize assistance to that aircraft.
So it's like a distress signal that cuts through all the other chatter
It is, yeah.
on the radio waves. What other emergency codes are there?
Okay, well, another really crucial one is 7500.
Okay.
That's used to signal unlawful interference.
Okay.
Think hijacking. By transmitting that code, pilots can discreetly alert the authorities to a serious security threat without having to make a voice call that might be overheard.
It's incredible how these codes allow pilots to communicate so much information
Yeah.
so quickly and efficiently,
Hmm.
even when voice communication is compromised. But what about the situations where radio communication is completely impossible? Like
Well,
in a
yeah.
radio failure or something.
Well, pilots are trained to handle those communication failures too.
Yeah.
They have procedures in place that allow them to convey their intentions and navigate safely, even when they're, essentially flying blind in terms of voice communication.
So even without being able to talk to air traffic control, they're not just winging it, there's still a plan. Oh, absolutely. If a pilot loses communication, they will follow very specific protocols. For example, they might maintain their last assigned altitude and speed for a predetermined amount of time, hoping that communication can be reestablished. They'll also report their position over certain compulsory reporting points, so letting air traffic control know where they are, even though they can't talk to them directly.
Right.
And they might use other means of communication, like light signals, to signal their intentions to other aircraft or to ground personnel.
It's amazing how they can maintain order and predictability even in those,
Yeah.
silent moments.
It is. It is.
Speaking of safety and planning, I'm seeing some interesting information here about a specific type of flight plan called an RPL. What does that stand for, and how does that work?
RPL stands for Repetitive Flight Plan.
Okay.
Think of it as a pre-approved, standardized route for a specific aircraft type that's flown frequently.
Oh, yeah.
It's like having a
A designated highway in the sky, optimized for efficiency and predictability.
So instead of having to file a unique flight plan every single time,
Right.
they can just use this pre-approved route.
Yeah, exactly. It streamlines things significantly, saves time and effort
Of
for both pilots and air traffic controls.
Yeah.
Imagine it like taking the same commute to work every day. You know the route.
Right.
You know the traffic patterns. You know what to expect. It becomes much more efficient than trying to figure out a new route every single time.
That's a great analogy.
But I imagine there are certain requirements and restrictions associated with these RPLs.
I would imagine so.
They can't just choose any random route, can they? Well, no, they can't. These RPLs, they need to be approved by the relevant air traffic control authorities
Okay.
to make sure that they fit into the overall flow of traffic and meet the safety standards. And it usually requires adjacent states or countries to be using the same RPL system for seamless operations across borders.
So it's really a collaborative effort to make those frequent routes as smooth and efficient as possible.
It is, yes. And it helps reduce workload and potential errors, which of course enhances safety and predictability for everyone involved.
Well, we've come to the end of our journey,
We have.
and I have to say This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of the A320.
It has been fun, hasn't it?
We've uncovered so much, from those meticulous pre-flight rituals to the intricate procedures for handling emergencies, the science behind those pilot calculations, to the technology that guides them through the skies. For our listener, we hope this deep dive has been not only informative, but also inspiring. It certainly sparked a curiosity in me to keep learning more about this incredible industry.
You know, every time you step onto an airplane, you're entering a realm of precision and expertise and a relentless pursuit of safety. So next time you settle into your seat, just take a moment to appreciate the marvel of flight and all those countless people who make it all possible.
And with that, we'll bring this A320 deep dive to a close.
Until next time, safe travels, everyone.